Welcome to today's Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. Before we get into the news of the day, the four horsemen of the Trumpocalypse, Bill Barr telling us who he really is, the anti-Trump panic. I want to talk about something that we unveiled today, Bulwark Plus, and I have to say I'm kind of jazzed about all of this. Look, if you go to our site, you get a complete explanation. Bottom line, we have been blown away by the success of the Bulwark. To say that it exceeded our wildest expectations is putting it mildly. I was talking to somebody yesterday about the background. They were asking me what the original plan was, and I said, to be quite honest, there was no plan. This was the Bulwark was an emergency launch. You go back and look at the calendar on December 14th, 2018. The Weekly Standard was murdered. It was killed by its owners. Uh, the Bulwark was launched on January 7th, so within a few weeks, and it was it was an extraordinary story. It was the core digital staff of the Weekly Standard basically hanging on, and we didn't know where we were going to go. In fact, we had discussions about whether or not we were going to get through 3 months, and the 3 months passed, and we found amazingly that we were growing, that we were finding an audience, that rather remarkably, in this era of extreme polarization, there were people on the center right and the center left that wanted this kind of non-tribal commentary. And it didn't hurt that we attracted an incredible circle of really bright and talented writers and commentators and artists to the website. So we've been talking for some time about what is our next step. I mean, we have a democracy to save here, people. It's not just that we have to finish the fight in the next few weeks. It's the long term. And that's why we're launching Bulwark Plus, because we want to focus on the long term. We want to grow, we want to build, we want to do more things. Look, we have three main principles. We No partisanship, no tribalism, and we're going to tell you what we really think. And we really prided ourselves on this independence. We've also prided ourselves on the kinds of people that we've attracted. I have a daily newsletter, Morning Shots, and every once in a while, I will turn over the newsletter to reader emails. And I know that's become one of the most popular features because the emails are so intelligent. I mean, you can judge a community or a publication by the quality of the people that follow it. And I have been blown away over and over again by the thoughtfulness and the diversity of the people who come to our website, who subscribe to our newsletters, who listen to our podcast, who read the articles on the site. What we're asking now is for you to join us. Those of you that can, that we're offering membership in Bulwark Plus. Look, we are not putting up a paywall for the main site. There's not going to be a paywall for this podcast. You will continue to get this podcast. You will continue to get all of the articles in the Bulwark. But we figured that we would branch out and create this new product, which will include a new suite of other podcasts, which will be in Bulwark Plus, my newsletter, Morning Shots, Jonathan Last's newsletter, which comes out every day in middle of the day, the Triad, will be in Bulwark plus a number of other products that I think you're going to find extraordinarily interesting. Now, why are we doing this? Well, because we want to go forward. We want to expand. We understand that this is a long-term thing. So we've gone from, hey, how do we get through the next 3 months when nobody has a job because the Weekly Standard was killed, to we've created something remarkable, and we have formed a community that is remarkable, and we want to go ahead. So I want you to check it out if you can. Bulwark Plus. No pressure. I'm not going to make the hard sell here. And as I said before, we want to avoid having ads, pop-ups. It's funny because right before we started this, we were talking about trying to watch a video on another site, and it was absolutely impossible because of what's happened, on the internet with, the ads and all the spam, etc. We are committed to avoiding that. And so this is why we're asking for your support, because we know that this is important to you. We know this conversation is going to continue. We know that no matter what happens in November, the issues that we have been wrestling with and the problems that we've been confronting are going to continue, and we want to continue to be an important voice. So again, if you get my newsletter on a regular basis, you will have seen that it looks different because we've moved it over from Mailchimp to Substack, and that will host our newsletters and our podcasts from now on. And again, we've always tried to do special things for the people who support us. So again, the people who contribute to the Bulwark from here on out, we're going to offer you access to the Bulwark Plus. Again, this is not going to affect your ability to listen to this podcast or the articles, but there will be the newsletters and there will be the other products. So please just check it out. The last 4 years have been will have been pretty awful, and I think that there are moments when you think, have I lost my mind, or is it just the rest of the world? And we have tried to be an oasis in all of that. We've tried to be a home for people who are politically orphaned. I certainly consider myself a political orphan, and we're going to continue to do that. So if you can go and help us out with, or not help us out, if you want to be a member of Bulwark Plus, please consider that. Think about it, and because if you're able and willing, Bulwark Plus is going to be a way to support what we have been doing here together. So join us because we do have this country to save. Well, today joining me on the podcast is one of our favorite contributors, Robert Tracinski, who has a piece up today about Skidmore College and the campus surveillance system. And the other day wrote a piece about why this is not the Flight 93 election. So we wanted to get him back on the podcast. Robert, thanks for joining us this morning. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
Well, we have a lot to talk about today. I just wanted to comment on some of the things that happened yesterday. The president throwing his director of the CDC under the bus. What an amazing moment! I mean, it was like watching it in real time. This car crash where Joe Biden says, this president is going to politicize the CDC, and then like within 5 minutes, what does Trump do? He comes out and he politicizes the CDC, throws Redfield under the bus for saying that the vaccine's probably not going to be widely distributed until the middle of next year. And of course, Trump comes out and says, he didn't know what he was talking about. That was bad enough. But then there was this moment, and I keep coming back to this theme that we're really not all in this together. And so let's listen to the president talking about red states and blue states here.
If you look at what we've done and all of the lives that we've saved, and I'm going to ask that a graph be put up, and now it's up. This was right at the beginning. This was our prediction that if we do a really good job, we'll be at about 100,000 to 240,000 deaths, and we're below that substantially, and we'll see where it comes out. But that would be if we did the good job. If the not-so-good job was done, you'd be between 1.5 million. I remember these numbers so well, and 2.2 million. That's quite a difference. So we're down in this territory. And that's despite the fact that the blue states had tremendous death rates. If you take the blue states out, we're at a level that I don't think anybody in the world would be at. We're really at a very low level. But
wait. If you take the blue states out, sort of like e pluribus unum, and except for the blue states. So I mean, Robert, once again, there's kind of a window into the president's mind that he really sees the country as two countries, doesn't he? The red states and the blue states.
What I take from this is that blue lives don't matter.
Oh, pretty good. That was well done. Look, I want to talk about your piece about Skidmore because, as you know, I'm very, very interested in this whole issue of the intellectual climate on campus, the illiberalism on campus. But let's just go back a couple of days to this whole anti-Trump panic.
Right.
And the Danielle Pletka article that was in the Washington Post, where she's a fellow at AEI, very highly respected, very, up until recently was considered to be quite, anti-Trump, very, very critical of Trump, but decides that, she just might have to vote for Donald Trump because the left wing is just so over the top and Joe Biden really can't be trusted. Now, your piece was not a direct response to hers.
Right, because I wrote it before that came out.
Right, but in a sense, it is an answer to it because you're looking at the same issue, and you know that there are these conservatives out there who are talking them. It feels like they're talking themselves into voting for Trump because they're just so appalled by the left and the apparently the leader of the left-wing revolution, Joe Biden. So talk to me about your piece because you are. But for our listeners, I mean, if we have a range of contributors to the Bulwark, we have some very progressive, there's kind of centrist. You're probably one of the most conservative, right?
Actually, I never call myself a conservative. If I had my druthers, I'd call myself a liberal. But
Small L liberal, right?
well, classical liberal. I mean,
Yeah,
we used to call it classical liberal. I think we should just steal the term back because nobody else seems to want it, and just get rid of the classical. Just say liberal. Or actually in the Bulwark a while back, I argued that what we need is neoclassical liberalism. So we need to get
that's a great bumper sticker, about
the old-fashioned liberals. The people who tend to be called neoliberals, the center-left people who tend to be called neoliberals, and the center-right people who tend to be called classical liberals, and get those together and form some kind of ideological coalition, because I think we have more in common than we do with the far left or with the nationalist right.
It's interesting you should say that because I actually, for about 5 minutes, had the idea that maybe we should just dump the whole term conservatism and just go for again recapture liberalism. And the book that really got me thinking about that was George Will's book on conservatism,
Exactly.
which I think is fantastic. And yet, by the end of the book, you realize what he's arguing for is classical liberalism.
Right.
And I remember even suggesting the idea, maybe we should just like take the name back, just like as you suggested, but from a marketing point of view, from a just like real world point of view, it was just not going to happen.
Well, what actually inspired, one of the things that inspired me was having a conversation about this with a friend, sort of a fellow parent, my kid at my kid's school, someone I know was sort of a conventional center left liberal type, and talking about what liberalism means. And I just love the confusion it brings to people on that side of the spectrum to ask, what does liberalism really mean? And the fact that it doesn't mean socialism and it doesn't mean political correctness. Clearly, those are illiberal strains. So I think I like the sort of ideological confusion it creates in people's minds is almost a plus in that sense, that it gets people to rethink those basic questions of what is liberalism. I go back to Ronald Reagan in his 1964 time of choosing speech, where he says, there is no left or right, there's just an up and a down, up to the maximum of freedom and down to totalitarianism. And I think that's sort of my guiding point in talking about politics. It's not left or right, it's up and down. And so I'm in the upside. So I've never called myself a conservative partly for that reason. I'm a secular free marketer. I'm an Ayn Rand guy. I'm an objectivist. But I'm the most radical probably in terms of being a pro-free marketer. So in that respect, I don't use libertarian either, because that usually means you're a blame America first guy when it comes to foreign policy. But I'm probably the most radical in terms of being a small government guy of all the people at the Bulwark.
Okay, so let's talk about the whole Flight 93 approach to the election for people who are listening. This was an article written back in 2016 by Michael Anton, and basically said, "Look, we're on the plane. If the Democrats, we need to storm the cockpit, and we may all die anyway. But we have no alternative, because if the Democrats were elected, if Hillary was elected, America is dead and it's destroyed." And there is that sort of mentality here. So there is a real thing. A lot of people are dunking on Danielle Pletka's piece, which is easily parodied. By the way, when's the last time the Washington Post ran an op-ed piece and then ran two parodies
of it? Yes.
Really. And they're both they're devastating. Alexandra Petri, who's been on this podcast, Daniel Dresner, who's also been on this podcast, both did takedowns of how ridiculous her arguments are, and they're both hilarious.
I liked Alexandra's. It was like, why stop forcing me to do this thing that I totally don't want to do? And it's it's clear that they're protesting too much.
Well, and Daniel Dresner's point is that essentially a lot of this is the running against imaginary Joe Biden. That if you just pretend that Joe Biden is going to do the things he specifically said he's not going to do, if you just imagine a Joe Biden who looks a little bit more like Vladimir Lenin, who might do these terrible things, then you can justify. But to be serious about it, there are in fact a lot of conservatives who are saying, okay, we know everything about Donald Trump. It's been awful. It's been terrible. But these Democrats, the left is so dangerous to American freedom, are so out there. And you have written about this. You have a piece today
Yeah.
about the stifling political correctness on campus. And we do know that there are starkly illiberal strains on the left, and so people are using that as the reason, you cannot vote even for Joe Biden, because the Democrats have been so captured by this illiberal revolutionary left. And I find it interesting that you're not buying that.
Well, okay. So first of all, I do buy
because you're not a Biden fan.
Right. I'm not,
Yeah.
I've never been a Biden fan. I used to refer to him as Senator Blowhard because, at every congressional hearing, every Senate hearing, he'd be there to grandstand more than to shed any light on anything. So I've never been a Biden fan. I've generally regarded him as a joke more than anything else, and because he hasn't been that crucially important up to now. But for all his faults, I don't view him as being as dangerous. But what I do want to say is I do accept the point that the far left is dangerous, that the far left is extremely illiberal, that if they got their way with everything they wanted to do, it would be extremely bad for the country. But what I'm not buying is the idea that Joe Biden is the guy who's moving us there faster, or that he's going to be the leading edge of this. But more to the point is the fact that I don't buy that Trump is the answer. And I also think if you use the far left as a bogeyman, as an eternal bogeyman, to say, oh, you have to vote for whoever has an R next to his name, you're never going to be able to confront the illiberal strains that are taking over the right. And that's the big problem. And the argument I make I call it the anti-Flight 93 election, is that if we're going to have to take on the illiberal strain in the right and push back at it and get it out of power and maybe try to discredit it, we better do so now when the alternative is Joe Biden, rather than 4 years from now when the alternative might be somebody much, much worse.
Yeah. So if in fact, and this is an interesting point that I thought that you made here, that if you decide that you're going to reject Joe Biden and go for another term with Donald Trump, you're going to end up with an increasingly toxified right and probably a more toxic left as well.
Well, so here's the question. Depending on how I gamed this out in the Bulwark probably like 6 months ago, is that, what happens if one person wins versus the other person losing? If Donald Trump loses, it's a great opportunity for a lot of people like you and me to say, we told you so, right? And to say, look, we told you this was not going to work out. We told you this guy, I like the sort of Washington Generals argument, right? So one of the most persuasive arguments by the pro-Trump people is that the Republican Party used to be like the Washington Generals. Those guys were the patsies who always play the Harlem Globetrotters. And, it's all a setup. They're always going to lose, right? But they're the gracious losers. And that was the role of the Republican Party, old Republican establishment. They were the gracious losers. And so we're going to get out of that and we're going to win. But what if you end up being the ungracious losers? Right. So what if you say we're going to not be the Washington Generals anymore? We're going to play hard. We're going to be tough. We're going to be ungracious. We're going to be ugly. And then we're still going to lose. Right. And that's like a worse outcome to be the ungracious losers. Who, not only did you lose the election, but then you become a standing, I think for a generation, the right is going to be recovering from this for a generation, that Donald Trump is the face and representative of what we supposedly stand for. We're going to be dealing with that for a fallout of that for a generation. So
at least a generation.
So, if Donald Trump loses, we're the ones who get to say, we told you so, and try to reform things and try to push things more in our direction. I'm not sure how well it's going to turn out for the Republican Party, but that's going to happen. If Joe Biden loses, who gets to say, I told you so? The Bernie bros get to say, I told you so, right? It's the very, very far left. Now, Bernie's not going to be the nominee 4 years from now. Probably not, because he's going to be even older. But there's a lot of other people competing for that, progressive champion. And I hate to say it, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will be eligible to run for president 4 years from now. So if they say, look, we nominated a moderate, somebody carefully in the middle, somebody supposed to appeal to all these independents and to these disgruntled Republicans, and it didn't work, the next time around, the Democratic Party is much more likely to put up somebody who's extremely radical.
So you wrote this, and we got some blowback. I got some blowback from this.
Yeah.
You wrote, I don't like Biden, and I really don't like the fact that he once again that these are our only stupid choices. But a Trump win will create an even more hostile ideological environment for advocates of liberty. So I want to talk about illiberalism.
Mm-hmm.
What is the illiberalism on the right now? The rising illiberalism, because as you point out, in the era of Trump, the phrase libertarian has become like a dirty word.
Right, and it's a real whipsaw. Because I was pretty heavily involved in the local Tea Party movement here about 10 years ago. Out here in Charlottesville, it was pretty active. And during the Tea Party era, you had this sort of rapprochement between the conservatives and the libertarians. We all felt like we could work together. We were all going in the same direction. And I thought, always at the time, at least, that Rand Paul becoming a Republican senator and sort of a well-known figure in the Republican Party was a symbol of that he came from this libertarian wing, and here he was being sort of incorporated into the Republican Party. There was this rapprochement between the more libertarian wing of the party and the more the conservatives.
Yeah. For a moment.
And that's really gone completely the opposite direction. And libertarian is now sort of a dirty word among the conservatives. And there's this new rising, quote unquote, nationalist approach, which, and they had a conference, I think middle of last year or middle of 2018, I think it was. They had a conference where, Yoram Hazony and a lot of these other people who are the sort of spokesman for this Patrick Deneen.
Patrick
Deneen,
right?
Yeah, I almost messed up his name. Patrick Deneen, a couple of these other people who are the spokesman for this nationalist approach, and they specifically say our enemy is the autonomous individual. Individualism is the enemy, and the idea that freedom and the freedom of the individual is the center of our politics. That's what we're out to get rid of, right? So it is very openly and explicitly an illiberal approach and a collectivist approach. The idea that the good of the nation is as a whole, as opposed to the good of the individuals that are part of it.
This really is a whipsaw, because, and I don't want to necessarily digress, but going back to the Tea Party, in retrospect, what the hell was the Tea Party about? Because a lot of the folks in the Tea Party are now completely all in on many of this illiberal conservatism, with the nationalism, have bought in on Trumpism. And here we're sitting here with a Tea Party-backed president who just yesterday said, yes, we absolutely need to spend more money on the stimulus. So the Tea Party was not about fiscal conservatism or about small government after all, was it? Or what? What the hell happened?
No, I think that's what it was about at the time. But like I said, it was a rapprochement between different wings of the right. And what happened is that as the Tea Party movement lost its momentum, the Tea Party movement kind of died in 2014. That was when it got its last sort of electoral victories. But I think two things happened. One is that it died. It died partly from success and partly from lack of success, and that's a kind of paradoxical way of putting it. So let me unpack that. The success part was there are a lot of places like the 5th District in Charlottesville, is the area around Charlotte. Its area goes from Charlottesville to Lynchburg down in Central Virginia, where we had a Democrat in Congress who had gotten elected by a margin of like 800 votes in 2008 during that big wave from Barack Obama. And clearly, and this had happened a lot of places, that Barack Obama brought a lot of people into Congress who were out of step with their districts, who were way more to the left than the districts they represented. And so a bunch of those people got sort of flushed out in the 2010 and I think the last of them in the 2014 election. And so I think that was the success of the Tea Party. It was this rebalancing of people in more right-leaning districts getting rid of, having the success. And then once that's gone, the urgency kind of disappears because, we don't have Tom Perriello. Tom Perriello was a Democratic congressman here. We don't have Tom Perriello to kick around anymore. So what are we going to do? But the lack of success was that the Republicans in Congress actually did do a lot. I mean, they were the only restraint in government spending that I've seen the only thing even close to restraint in government spending that I've seen in the last 20 years is what John Boehner and, remember the sequester and all of that around 2013, 2014. So there was some success, but they never repealed Obamacare. They didn't, because Obama was still in office, there's only so much
going to happen.
Right. There are certain things that weren't going to happen. And I think some of them just got impatient. And that's where this sort of Washington Generals argument about what good is the GOP establishment? They never accomplish anything. That's where that comes from.
Well, and also there was the rise of this outrage industry. I mean,
I think that feeds
the Tea Party turned itself into this, constantly demanding things that could never be happen, and really, I felt it morphing into we want to be permanently angry and permanently betrayed, and somehow that didn't morph into this kind of politics of resentment, and anything that makes liberals cry is good for us, and we're all exactly.
Well, and that's why I think that I said it died by lack of success, because I think that after a while that lack of success turned into this bitterness and this anger and this outrage industry, and the outrage and wanting to be angry at people became the goal instead of actually having an agenda. But I think the other thing that happened is that the Tea Party movement did not just turn into a bunch of pro-Trump people. It was a coalition that formed together, and then a part of it peeled off and became pro-Trump, and a part of it, I think, went back to being somewhat politically apathetic.
So let's go to the moment we're in right now, because you know a lot of conservatives, and here's the mood on the right, and I'm not talking about the Never Trump right, but
Right.
on the right, which is that, okay, Donald Trump has been embarrassing in many ways, but he's turned out on a policy matter, leaving aside the personality and the style, to be relatively conservative, and the Democratic Party has moved hard left. So first of all, shouldn't conservatives, the argument would be, well, at least, he has governed as a conservative, and the Democrats would impose this left-wing regime, which you've written about very, very extensively. So, this is the anti-Trump temptation. This is the Daniel Pletkas of the world saying, okay, he's been bad, but at least he's been conservative. And Joe Biden is simply a stalking horse for Che Guevara. Right? I mean,
that is the argument. Now, the one thing I would say is that it really exaggerates the extent to which Trump has been good from our perspective, from the perspective of somebody on the right. And I think part of it has to do with people pay attention to the issues that Trump wants them to pay attention to, and not the issues they themselves thought were super important 5 years ago. So you mentioned, the spending that we've had and the total lack of any restraint on spending. And they just came out with a commitment to America. It's like the latest version of the contract with America, the supposed agenda of the Republican Congress that they're running on in this election. And somebody pointed out that controlling government spending isn't even in there. It is no longer, it is officially
it's not even there.
It's not even, it's like mentioned like in passing that we will reduce the debt or something like that, while it's just like a little phrase tacked on somewhere, but it's not a bullet item. It's not in the contract with America, it was the first agenda item. We have to decrease the federal budget. We have to get back to a balanced budget, that sort of thing. That used to be the top thing. Now it's not even on the agenda. So one of the things that happens is this sort of memory hole that things go into where, Donald Trump brings us to, they're burning the flag and there's Antifa over here and there's this over there and there's that over there. And you pay attention to the things that he's making noise about. And you don't pay attention to the things that really mattered to you 5 years ago. So if you pay attention to, the budget and the deficit, I mean, the deficit's going to be at least 2.8 trillion for 2020. I mean, 2.8 trillion with a T. And it was already nearly a trillion before, any emergency and economic before the pandemic, before the economic decline, it was already nearly a trillion. So, total lack of interest in any kind of control on spending or debt. And even in foreign policy, there are a few things here like this Israel deal, but there's also, the deal they made with the Taliban that were basically not just walking away from Afghanistan, but empowering the Taliban. Sheikh Hatiri has done some very good stuff on the Bulwark about that. So That's part of it. Now, but I think the overall thing, I said I didn't write my piece as a response to Danielle Pletka. And if I had, I think there's something else I would have included, which is the main technique I think she's using goes something like this. You take the very, very worst things that are being done on the left, and you take those as central to the entire agenda and
Yes.
meaning of the Democratic Party. And all the good things that are done on the left are just, they're inconsequential and it's, all the, I won't say good things, but all the non-scary things, the moderate things, you say, oh, those just are inconsequential window dressing. And then when you look to the right, you say, well, look, sure, there's some scary stuff out there and some racists and people and things like that. But that's insignificant and inconsequential. And then you take all the stuff that you like that's good and you say that's the real essence of what's going on. And it's clear that there's a very high selectivity there. But if I were to, and it involves a lot of denial in two directions.
This is an excellent point, and this is exactly the process where you pick out the worst example of the other side, make that. This is who they are. That defines them. But you are the worst guys on your side. Well, you can ignore all of them. The problem, of course, is that you have Donald Trump, who's blotting out the sun on the right and encouraging and empowering those worst guys.
Right. He's retweeting white nationalists and QAnon conspiracists and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Whereas Joe Biden ran against a lot of the crazy and beat them decisively.
Well, the big argument here is that, they're saying, oh, well, Joe Biden will just be a figurehead and it'll be the far left that's really running the show. It's like, well, why hasn't that been the case of his campaign? The big thing about his campaign from the very beginning, and there's been some good articles documenting this, is run by a bunch of moderate Democrats who basically have run the campaign as if Twitter didn't exist. I think I wrote an article for the Bulwark about how Trump is our first extremely online president. Somebody else made the comment that if Biden wins, he will probably be our last offline president. Right? He's somebody who came,
right.
He is a man of the pre-internet era. He does not have the chatter on Twitter sitting in the back of his head, having this exerting this influence over him. And he's run his campaign very much as if the real core of the Democratic Party is, pragmatic people out there, non-woke black people in South Carolina are the, who don't want to defund the police. They want to reform them. That this sort of reasonable moderates are the real core of the Democratic Party. And it turns out he was actually correct about that. And then he actually won the nomination that way. So the idea that somehow, that's an illusion and when he gets into office, he's actually going to be run completely by the left. Now, I don't think he'll provide the kind of resistance to the far left that I would like to see. He is, after all, a Democrat, right? So I'm not, singing hosannas about what a great and wonderful leader Joe Biden is going to be. I think he will be more susceptible to the craziness of the far left than, the candidate I'd like to see. But the candidate I'd like to see is unfortunately not on the ballot. But the idea that he's going to be just a puppet president and the far left's going to be controlling the strings goes against how the entire way he ran his campaign.
Yeah, I think that's why the creation of the imaginary Joe Biden. So again, let me tell you a little bit of a story here, because and you'll understand this, I think. I've been anti-Trump, never Trump. So have you. Really from the beginning at considerable inconvenience. But I will say that it was much easier for me to be anti-Trump than it is to actually vote for a Democrat of any kind.
Yeah.
Okay. So to go from anti-Trump to pro-Joe Biden was a wrench, and it takes you a while. I mean, in part, I voted for third party. 4 years ago, in part because I didn't think there was any chance that he was going to win.
Yeah.
And because I didn't want to, feel that it was a binary choice. But, this has been a difficult thing. Now, had the Democrats nominated Bernie Sanders, I think I probably would have been never Trump, never Bernie.
Yeah.
But Joe Biden is the moderate guy who actually does speak to people who think that the soul of the nation is at risk. And eventually what I came around to thinking, and you and I are both kind of policy wonk guys, but at this particular moment, I realized that politics is less about specific policy differences than it is about values, fundamental values, and that there will be times when I can disagree with you on 8 out of 10 issues, but if I think that you are an honest, honorable, decent, empathetic human being who understands and values the rule of law and liberal democracy and constitutionalism, then you and I can do business. So for me, it's hard to say I am for Joe Biden, but I am because, quite frankly, this is not a normal election and this is not a normal choice. So I actually, the reason I'm mentioning this today is I was actually supposed to do this press thing. The Biden campaign actually called me up. Listen to this.
Yeah.
And said, would you like to do a Republicans for Biden? Well, I'm not really a Republican, but I will explain why, I've broken with, 30 years of conservative Republican rhetoric in this particular case. If you want me to do that, I will do that. And so they said, and they set it up and they sent me press releases on it. And then late last night, I got this email saying, hey, sorry for the late notice, but due to some listen to this. This is classic. Due to some moving pieces on the campaign side and shifting get out the vote priorities, we're going to postpone tomorrow's press conference. And hey, we'll be sure to reach out for any future asks. So it's like, thanks. You know what I'm saying here? It's like
it got spiked. Yeah.
So somebody good, we don't want that. We don't, So look, I understand.
I'm used to that from media things where they send that and the reading between the lines is, we got somebody more famous than you to go on the show. So we dropped you.
Or in this particular case, there's a lot of Democrats who still hate your guts. And so
that's probably it.
Yes. So we're all about reaching across the divide, but hey,
but not to you.
Yeah, but not to you exactly. But I get it. But the case that I think is so important to make is to other center right conservatives who just need to understand that there are things that you're going to get from this president, but I mean the abandonment of principle on free trade, free markets, the rule of law, the embrace or the tolerance of corruption, the abandonment of America's role in the world. Donald Trump does not really believe in American exceptionalism, despite all of this. He doesn't think of America as a shining city on a hill the way that Ronald Reagan.
Well, I think the biggest thing for me, it's something that bridges domestic policy and foreign policy, is his love affair with authoritarians.
I was going to get to that. That is stunning to me. Can you imagine, a Republican president who claims to be a conservative and yet is fascinated not just by Vladimir Putin, but by all of the worst thuggish authoritarians. And what appears to attract him the most is, in fact, their thuggishness and their cruelty.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry.
And by contrast, now, see, here's the thing. I have the great fortune. So you're in Wisconsin, so you have to decide how you're going to vote because it might actually make a difference. Right? It's a pretty close. The election is pretty close there. In Virginia, it doesn't matter what I decide. It's Virginia's like 10 or 12 points. Biden's 10 or 12 points up in Virginia. I'm not going to make a difference one way or the other. I can not vote for him and it won't matter. So I'm very happy that I don't have to make that decision this year. But I will say that Biden represents, and he's been doing this from the very beginning, campaigning this way. And I think it is, for all his faults, he represents a return to normality. Yeah. That he's in, he has faults, but he has faults in the way a normal politician has faults. And Trump represents this abnormality, this huge departure from the way our politics works. And that thing we just began with earlier, the blue lives don't matter, the idea that, well, if you don't count the blue states, we're doing well. How appalling is it? I mean, it happens so often that we get numb to it. And I think that whole sort of argument about how, well, look how scary the left is, that's terrible. And then minimizing anything bad that happens to the right, I think that is possible because of that numbness that he creates, because he's doing it every day, all the time, 3 tweets a day at least, that are just absolutely appalling. So you just price it in. It becomes normal. It becomes expected and no longer shocks you anymore. And so then that's how they talk you into sort of minimizing it. But, you have to really, keep that perspective that this is an extremely abnormal president who acts in extremely abnormal ways and breaches all of the usual conventions that we have that, you may actually despise half the country, but you're not supposed to say it.
Right. That's what it takes it off that normal right-left axis. And Mona Chern had a piece that she wrote for us as well that really made this point very powerful. She said, "Look, the one essential rock upon which this country depends is the rule of law." And then she was, when it went there, she said, "Look, preserving the rule of law is more crucial than blocking Medicare for all, more essential even than preventing another Iran deal. If the rule of law is undermined as Trump is doing and threatens to accelerate, everything else, prosperity, civil cohesion, security, is in danger. Everything else, those are the stakes. Not things like the filibuster, not hairstyles, not virtue signaling." Not whether or not you're going to watch cuties on Netflix. These are fundamental issues. So, part of it is that we have over the last 4 years have become numbed and accept, the abuse, the narcissism, the willingness to stoke racial animus, but and this ongoing assault on the rule. But Bill Barr, I mean, here's a guy who,
Yeah.
at least there's nothing imaginary or fake about Bill Barr. I mean, Bill Barr, give him credit. He is telling us who he is over and over and over again. And you kind of get an indication of where this country goes in a second term, and how anyone who thinks of themselves as a libertarian is comfortable with that is, that's for a topic for another day. I love the signs all over southeast Wisconsin: "Vote for Trump to preserve freedom."
Yeah.
And there's Bill Barr basically saying, yeah, we ought to, invoke this, charge people with sedition. I alone can determine who gets prosecuted or doesn't get.
As
Let's charge the mayor of Seattle criminally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In this day and age where everybody's supposed to love Hamilton and downgrade Jefferson, I'm a Jeffersonian still. And I remember that he ran against the Alien and Sedition Acts. That was one of the things about the Adams administration that really galvanized people against it and basically destroyed the Federalist Party, is this use of sedition as a way to punish people who are your political opponents. And I think that, it is a totally abnormal thing. The way I would put it is that I think the worst outcome likely from a Biden administration is we become more like a Western European welfare state. And the worst outcome from Donald Trump was we become more like Putin's Russia. And if I had to choose between those two, it's not a very, I don't like either result, but the one of them is clearly better than the other.
See, this is the thing that yes, you might have expanded social programs which you and I might critique, but those seem like the old form of politics, the old kinds of threats. The threat posed by another 4 years of Trumpism is much more. I know the word existential has been used over and over again, but in terms of what it does to the culture, what it does to the fabric of the country, what it does to constitutional norms, all of those things is so much graver than that. Okay, but I also think it's worthwhile just to remind our friends on the center left what it is about the illiberal left that freaks conservatives out. So could you just briefly tell me? People should go to the website and read Robert's story about what's going on in Skidmore. But this and again, this is become the symbol of what's going on the left. This incredible bullying. This demand for ideological conformity that used to be confined to university campuses and probably is found there in the most virulent form. But you tell a really scary story about Skidmore.
Well, yeah. Okay. So I will say, to give them credit, that there are some people on the center left. I mean, there's that Harper's letter that came out a while back against cancel culture. So there are some people on the center left who are really waking up about this and saying, wait a minute, this is a problem and we have to confront it. And I'm very glad to see that. I think that's, I think us complaining about it is a lot less influential than, people who are on the center left who are sort of within the fold complaining about it and saying that it needs to stop. So this is a great example of exactly something we're talking about. So this has happened at Skidmore College. It's a small liberal arts school in upstate New York near Saratoga Springs. And there was a professor there who was spotted in the crowd at a Blue Lives Matter rally. So this is, Blue Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter, the pro-police rally. He was spotted in the crowd. And he wasn't an organizer of it. He wasn't speaking at it. He was just there. And a couple of students noticed him there and started a social media campaign demanding that he be fired from his job at the university, simply because he was there at the protest. And I sort of described that as this sort of volunteer amateur surveillance safe we had, a sort of a spontaneous Stasi that we have, where you're constantly being watched and people are recording you on their phones and telling and informing the authorities of your thought crime. And that's what so they mounted this campaign to get him fired. Now, the good news is the university did not fire him.
Yes, that's important.
And actually, to their credit, I think from what I could tell, I talked, as David Peterson is the professor's name. I talked to him and he said, basically, they didn't even consider firing him just for being at a political rally or holding the wrong political views. He says he's known to his fellow faculty as somebody who's more sort of a conservative, but he says probably not really known to students that way because he teaches metalsmithing, right? So politics doesn't come up in metalsmithing. But they said the university didn't even consider firing for his political views. They did an investigation, spent a couple of weeks investigating because there's this form letter that was going out that people were sending in, accusing him of creating a hostile environment for students of color and all that. Very vague, of course. And the university investigated that and cleared him. Now, it doesn't mean he's out, completely avoided consequences, because he says, enrollments in his class have dropped,
and he was investigated.
And yeah, he was investigated. And his wife says, his wife said, okay, great. Where do we go to get our reputations back? So, he's been speared as a racist and a white supremacist and all of that. But the interesting thing, what he and I both really noticed about it, is there was an op-ed done by one of these woke students in the school newspaper talking about her big complaint was not just about, there's a professor who was at this protest. She also went on at length to complain about how there are all these facilities workers on the campus, the guys, fixing the plumbing and doing the electricity, who are going around with Blue Lives Matter masks on or with Trump bumper stickers on their car. And we've complained to the university and they haven't done anything about it. And that's what was amazing to me, this idea that the help. I mean, this is a $58,000 a year tuition school. And these are people who are being given liberal arts degrees. And, the big class divide in America is college educated versus non-college educated. These are the college educated kids who are going to go on, at least some of them, to, upper middle class jobs and elite positions in the world. And they're complaining that the help has political opinions.
Jeez. Well, as you point out, all of this serves as a massive in-kind contribution to Donald Trump's re-election campaign, because it's proof, for real Americans, quote unquote, that the quote unquote elites look down on them and want to impose their dogmas on them.
Well, it explains to you why it is there are a lot of Trump supporters, especially blue collar people, who feel like the left simply wants to expunge us. It wants to get rid of us. It wants to destroy us for not agreeing with its political views. And they've got a point. There is a wing of the left that wants to do that. Now, the thing is that is a wing of the left. That's the very far left. And like I said, there's the great news is there's Andrew Sullivan and Yasha Munk and a bunch of these people, Thomas Chatterton Williams, a bunch of these sort of center left people who are saying, no, we're against that. We want to have robust discussion and debate. And there's the Skidmore College is not a bastion of conservatism. It's a left leaning university. But, the university administration didn't fire Dave Peterson because of this. I don't think they're probably going to fire the guy who's screwing in the light bulbs because he has a Trump t-shirt on. So this is just a wing of the left, but it's important to recognize that this is there, it's out there. And this is what legitimately, I think, terrifies some people, especially, if you're an electrician or a plumber or, one of these blue collar guys who goes and it's, he's there working at the university and you're fixing somebody's dorm room and they are just appalled that you even exist as someone who doesn't share their political views. It has that sort of totalitarian feel to it.
No, and I think that it's hard to overstate that, and I wish many of the woke pundits would walk through small towns in Michigan and Wisconsin and Iowa and perhaps recognize why it's important not to sound crazy. Okay, that didn't mean to say crazy, but not to not to say things that convey their contempt and their dislike for others, because this is a really powerful political force, that sense that they really hate us, they look down on us, And that really drives a lot of this. And it's not totally baseless. But again, it's like, who speaks for the left? Is it going to be the center left, small L classical liberals like Yasha Monk? Or is it going to be, the woke activists that you're talking about in Skidmore? And they need to work this out, because we on the right failed miserably in policing our crazy, right? I mean, we've been through
Yeah.
this. We did not rein in the loudest, craziest voices, and look where it led to. So the left, which I think is also often very reluctant to engage in that kind of introspection, needs to understand that if you want to actually win elections and win over hearts and minds, that there are areas of commonality, but those areas of commonality end the moment that people think, I despise you, or
Yeah.
you despise me.
Yeah.
And my very existence somehow is an insult to them, and that the quote unquote conversations about race basically involve you shutting up and then confessing that you're guilty.
Yeah, the left has always liked to have quote unquote conversations that can basically consist of them yelling at you.
Well, remember what William F. Buckley said, that liberals, always say that they're open to hearing other points of view, and then are actually surprised to find out that there are other points of view.
Yes. Well, and I find that to be the case because it's something I noticed that, and it's not so much. I mean, I can kind of see naturally where it comes from because, Charlottesville's a university town,
Yeah.
and I'm not in Charlottesville. I'm outside of Charlottesville, but I'm in there enough that, it's a place that voted 80% for Barack Obama in 2012. So it gives you an idea that it's a very sort of, everybody's very much on the left. And it's very easy if you live there to think that everybody else agrees with you. And that, all reasonable people that you're in this, I have people tell me that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is in the center of American politics. And I look at them like, are you crazy? But if you're in that environment, you might actually think that is the center of American politics, because it's the center of the bubble the ideological bubble that you live in. And depending on the neighborhood you live in, or where you hang out online, on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever, this can actually seem like that is the center, and that only these extreme crazy troglodytes disagree with this in any way.
Well, and I think a majority of Americans now live in bubbles. Actually, I think I saw the term super clusters in a piece that David French wrote in Time magazine, where you think about the number of Americans that live in counties or communities where 80% of the people there vote either for Republicans or for Democrats, and then we do have these massive super clusters geographically separated, and maybe that gives you also this feeling that we have of the country kind of pulling apart. And this goes back to and a president who clearly views us in terms of, these are my clusters, this is my bubble, I'm the president of these people and not of those. So all of that plays together. That you're in these bubbles. They exist online. They exist physically. They exist politically. They exist in so many ways. And I got to tell you that's what alarms me about 4 more years of Trump. Somebody who really relishes stoking that kind of division.
Yeah, well, I kind of resist the idea that this is worse than it has ever been, because we had a civil war in this country. You had the civil rights movement, you had the Dixiecrats and all that, and talk about people who lived in a bubble and were very fanatical, and things have been worse. Let's put it that way. But it is still good to be alarmed about the fact that they're getting worse again. They're heading in that direction. And I think people need to get out more. They need to have more interaction with people who don't agree with them. But also the thing I'm pushing to is what I would love to see would be more of an ideological realignment, where we don't think in terms of left versus right. Because I think what corrupts people is this idea that, well, if you identify as left versus right, and left includes everything from Joe Biden out to, communists, then if you're on the left, you feel like you have some sort of common kinship, and you have to somehow protect and minimize the hardcore far left people who don't care about freedom, who want to nationalize, want government to take over everything, who want to shut down anybody who disagrees with them. It disarms you. Thinking of yourself as being on that team disarms you against the crazies on your side. And the same thing on the right. And we've absolutely, you and I have absolutely seen that we knew a lot of these crazy. There were a lot of crazy ideologies out there on the right. We knew that there were some people who were racist. We knew there were some people who were nationalists. We knew there were some people who were very illiberal on the right. But we thought, well, that's a small group over there, and we don't have to worry about them as much. And then you suddenly see them, become much more powerful and influential, and you see how reluctant other people are on the right are to criticize them and say, no, this is not what we stand for, because it's, they used to say no enemies to the left. There's also a no enemies to the right. We refuse to see the existence of any people who are dangerous and bad, who are quote unquote on our side. So I think the way we think of ourselves as being in these ideological coalitions is corrupting.
This is a really important point, and we probably should devote a future podcast to it, because I agree with you absolutely, and I do think that there needs to be that kind of realignment. I wish I was more optimistic about it. I think that there are challenges that we face that we haven't faced in the past, and we've talked about this before with the way social media is driving us deeper and deeper into various ideological extreme rabbit holes. But you're right, and that's one of the things that I think I started the podcast by talking about what we're thinking of doing at the Bulwark, which is that I think that it is absolutely crucial to have that kind of a debate, to begin to see things not right, left, but sort of up and down. We're either going to move toward this more illiberal authoritarianism on the right or the left, or we're going to go back to our classical liberal roots of being more tolerant. And I think that maybe that up and down is what we're going to have to stress here. So, Robert Tracinski, thank you so much for all of your contributions to the Bulwark and for coming on the podcast today. We'll have to have you back very, very soon.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening to today's Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back tomorrow, and we will do this all over again.